Welcome back, my fellow peanuts, and welcome to anyone who is new to this podcast or to this channel. Now, this podcast covers true crime cases that may not be suitable for young listeners, so listener and viewer discretion is advised. Now, a really quick one for you today, guys. Today, I am wearing my husband's shirt for his indoor cricket, Victoria. He is playing the Masters 40s this year. It's his third year. He is playing in Adelaide. So to show him support, I am wearing his shirt. So it says on here, number 23, Macdonald. That is our last name, obviously, but very, very cool. And I'm very, very excited to see him play once again. I hope you have all had a fabulous 2 weeks since the last episode. Wasn't it the biggest week for the Menendez brothers, though? So I hope you all know what I'm talking about. If you don't, you're about to get a sneak peek and a tune-in. So whilst today's episode is not about them, I do want to give a quick update on them before starting today's episode because it's really important. I've done 2 episodes on them. I think it's really important to show awareness and make sure that anything that I'm able to provide an update on, that I give you guys an update. Now, more than 3 decades after one of America's most widely known family murders, a new chapter has opened up in the Eric and Lyle Menendez. So originally they were sentenced to life without parole for the 1989 killing of their parents. The brothers have now been resentenced with the possibility of freedom. What this means, though, is this week a Los Angeles judge, he handed down a revised sentence, which is 50 years to life. But because of the changes in California law, both brothers are actually now immediately eligible for parole. Now, the reasons for this eligibility is because they were both underneath the age of 26 at the time of the crime. So California law actually allows them to be considered for parole immediately. During their courtroom statements, though, they expressed an extreme amount of remorse. Lyle had actually admitted to perjury during the original trial, and he even apologized to the family. Eric would actually call his actions criminal, selfish, and cowardly. So the next steps involve their case going before the California Board of Parole hearings and potentially to the governor's office for final review. You can go to both of my episodes in, one of them in a link above. If you like, guys, I'll put it into my comment section or into my summary just so you guys can go and watch those episodes so that you get a understanding of what I've come from with the Menendez brothers. So what I would like to know, though, guys, is what do you think led to this dramatic shift? What role do you think their childhood trauma and the abuse, did they get any real rehabilitation in jail? And what do you think this means for the actual case itself? And do we think there's going to be a change to the justice system at large, given that it wasn't really looked at least for the second trial? And I'm getting a little bit too in depth, so I'm going to try and give this up as quickly as I can. But they were really robbed at their second trial because they didn't really have a defense. But I am considering doing a follow-up episode if the boys are released. But let's get to our newest episode. Our state to date is Vermont. So welcome back to the Crimes from the Peanut Gallery, the podcast where we delve into the most intriguing and chilling cases around serial killers. I'm your host, Vic, and today we're going to be exploring the dark and disturbing case of Israel Keyes, a name that's become really quite synonymous with calculated and cold-blooded murder. He's also not what you would... So I'm going to get into this, obviously, throughout the episode. But he's definitely not what I would consider an easy serial killer to mark. His victimology didn't have, there was no standardization with his victims. He killed on a whim, but definitely had that sociopathic. And it looks like to me that he had the triad, the Macdonald triad. So I think what we're going to see on today's episode is just a little bit more of another serial killer where you don't really understand why he's doing what he's done. He died before you could really get any real answers. but it's definitely a really intriguing one for me. I heard vaguely of this one, but obviously he doesn't have a nickname or anything like that, and I think that was potentially because there is only 3 of the victims that have been confirmed. However, there definitely are more, but this one's a little bit tough, guys. So let's get into it. So Israel Keyes was an American serial killer, a rapist, an arsonist, and a burglar, and a bank robber. His crimes were meticulously planned and executed. It was making him one of the most elusive and dangerous criminals in our recent history. But what we don't really understand is what drove him to commit these things. But let's delve into his background and the timeline of his crimes. So he was born on January 7th in 1978 in Richmond, Utah. Now, he's the second of 10 children to Heidi and John Jeffrey, otherwise known as Jeff Keyes. His parents were originally from Torrance, California. They were members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and his father had previously served as a missionary in Germany. So I'm guessing from the background so far, guys, what you're going to see here is quite a heavy fixture on religion. So until 1983, he and his siblings were homeschooled. After leaving the LDS church, their father moved them to a really remote cabin in Stevens County in Washington. Now, this is where they would actually live without electricity or running water. It surprises me that this would be a lifestyle that you would choose for 10 children, given that there's no real accommodations for them. It's a cabin, so it's not very big. It's not seemingly an area which you'd want to bring up your children because, I mean, for nature, it would be fabulous, but it's just certainly not something that it wouldn't be an ideal childhood. I'm just going to take a sip. So I'm drinking tea today. Today I needed a hug. So it's a care bear. Sorry, guys, I shall continue. So while they're in this area, the family began attending a church known as the Ark, which followed the white supremacist Christian ideology. Israel would actually liken it to an environment very similar to the Amish. And during this time, the Keyes family became acquainted with their neighbours, which would be Chevy Kehoe. Their neighbours, which would be the Kehoes. Now, most notably, who would live there would be Chevy Kehoe, who would end up being later convicted for a triple homicide in 1996. Chevy was an American convicted murderer. He's serving 3 consecutive life sentences for the kidnapping, torture, and murder of the Mueller family. His accomplice would actually be sentenced to death for the murders in 2020. So if these are the kind of people you're growing up with, I'm not thinking it's the easiest and that's the best of childhoods. I mean, this is, again, just a personal opinion. It's got absolutely no bearing or any type of that, but just so you guys are aware. Now, while he began his teenage years, his family would actually attend another church as well. This one would be a fringe congregation known as the Christian Israel Covenant Church. Now, this wasn't really your average Sunday service. The church preached British Israelism. Now, that's a doctrine claiming that the Anglo-Saxons were called the inferior race. Interracial relationships, they were condemned. They were known as deviant and abominable. He would actually later describe the church as militia-like. And life at home wasn't really any easier because the remote cabin was too small for the entire family. So some of the children were actually forced to sleep in tents for years. They hunted for their own food, they chopped their firewood and worked on nearby farms just to help the family get by. He really stood out in this type of environment and not at all in a good way, not at all. He developed a couple of disturbing hobbies. He would hunt anything with a heartbeat. One story that still haunts those who actually knew him: he would once brag to his fellow churchgoers about skinning a deer alive. That moment sort of marked probably a pretty key turning point in his fantasies turning abominably violent. But one girl from the congregation would say his presence made her skin crawl. So obviously he's already got that not such a great feel to him at the moment. It's by the age of 14, though, that he stood over 6 feet tall, and his actions were starting to raise some pretty significantly big red flags. He admitted shooting into neighbours' homes with a BB gun, setting fire in the woods. He also broke into houses with another local boy. He would end up distancing himself from Keyes himself because he'd seen him shoot an animal without any hesitation or remorse. In one particular chilling incident, Keyes stole several firearms from a neighbour's home. When his parents actually discovered the stash, they forced him to return the weapons and apologise. But that didn't stop him from committing further crimes. He'd actually later steal a lot more guns, and he'd sell them to the adults in the area. Then came the moment that would haunt everyone who got to witness this. While his family was actually hosting like a barbecue of some sorts and had some friends over with a lot of children present, it would also include his own sister. He would actually tie up a cat. He would shoot it with a .22 revolver. Unfortunately, the cat did not actually die initially, and he would watch it painfully die, and he would reportedly laugh at the cats, like, it's just no. One of the boys who'd actually witnessed it would vomit himself and had to tell his dad. It's around this time, though, that he described what was an epiphany. He realized he was different. While other kids ran for him, he's increasing his antisocial behaviour. His mum's even noticing the changes. She described him as turning into a troubling young boy. He was listening to weird radio stations, and he's becoming a lot more withdrawn. He's not just destructive, though. He's capable. At 16, he's built a wooden cabin for his family and worked as a local contractor. He kept a journal that he'd filled with Bible verses and confessions of guilt, and it was often about wanting to do things with his girlfriend. The family moved to a remote Amish community in Maine where they tapped maple trees for syrup. It's there that their mother's strict religious beliefs forced the children to secretly watch movies and actually play music. It's during these periods, though, that he really began to abandon his faith. In particular, after a really, really heated argument, he told his parents that he no longer believed in God, and their response was to actually kick him out. They even told his younger siblings, who really idolized him, to cut off all contact with him. So at this stage, he's alone and he's rejected, and he's just turning into something a lot darker, and he turns to Satanism. With that, he begins to start sort of doing things far more sinister. He's looking into how he can do a ritualistic murder. It's not surprising because I do see a lot of this when I've watched the documentaries, that religion does play quite a strong part in some people, and I think that it can have quite a significant negative impact on some people. Me personally, I'm a non-practicing Catholic, but I definitely believe in something. That's just that's just my own personal belief. I'm not pushing it on anybody, but I have certainly seen in a lot of documentaries where it is quite significant, and it has a really lasting impact. And it gains one of those people. You just got to be really careful, I think. But that's my personal opinion. But this is really where we start to see a monster emerge. It's in the summer of 1997 or 1998 in Oregon. A teenage girl was tubing down one of the rivers with her friends. Now, unfortunately, she wasn't aware that she was being watched. It's from the tree line that Israel Keyes had actually stalked her. He later confessed to what happened next. He abducted the girl at knife point, and his own words were that he very, very violently sexually assaulted her. He believed she was aged somewhere between 14 and 18. His actual original plan was to kill her as a part of a satanic ritual. But he didn't. Instead, he let her go, and he would place her back on the river tube, which he'd actually taken her from. When he was arrested, he would say, "I was too timid. I wasn't violent enough. I made up my mind that I was never going to let that happen again. It's absolutely insane that he thinks that that was a moment that he lost. And that's sort of the way it's played and projected when he was talking about that incident. And it was like a lost moment for him. Not murdering someone is considered a lost moment for him. Pretty appalling human being, if you ask me. So it would be later that he would enlist in the US Army. He was stationed in New York and he served as a specialist in Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry, 25th Infantry Division. He passed a preliminary course for an Army Ranger training. During his time in the Army, he was stationed at Fort Lewis and Fort Hood. He spent time abroad, Sinai and Egypt. There he actually told a fellow soldier, "I'd like to kill you." At Fort Lewis, he served as on a mortar team. Fellow soldiers would describe him as quiet, withdrawn. On weekends, he would actually drink quite heavily, often drowning entire bottles of wild turkey bourbon. In 2001, he was arrested for driving under the influence and he was fined $350. He was also a big fan of hip-hop duo Insane Clown Posse. He would decorate most of his barracks with their posters. It's despite this darkness that's sort of brewing underneath that surface. He is awarded during this time the Army Achievement Medal for his service. He was honorably discharged in 2001 and he would end up moving to Washington. There it was on the Maca Reservation. He lived with a Native American girlfriend he'd met online. They would end up having a daughter together, but that relationship didn't seemingly last because by the time he was arrested, he was actually dating a nurse. So in 2007, he actually started a construction business in Alaska, Keys Construction. He worked as a handyman and a contractor. And clients would often describe him as really skilled. He was really reliable. But some women would actually report that during brief unsettling moments, dark expressions and just some of his behaviour would make them quite uneasy. He also owned 10 acres and a rundown cabin in Constable, New York, a quiet place, remote, isolated, a little bit like him. He didn't hunt like most serial killers, though. He didn't stalk familiar neighborhoods or target specific type of victims. Instead, what he did, what was his victimology, was he would travel across the United States, choosing victims at random. He planned his crimes months in advance, though, and he would often frequent remote campgrounds and isolated areas. He would tell investigators he preferred strangulation over firearms. Why, you might ask? Because he took pleasure in watching his victims lose consciousness. Guns, he said, were used only as an absolute necessary. He also apparently had rules. He said no children and no parents of young children. He said it was because of his own daughter. He didn't want her to discover what he had done one day down the track. The FBI is still not entirely convinced of this, though. It's not unheard of for serial killers or even organisations, mob organisations. Apparently the Irish mob have a rule, no women, no children. So it's a code of conduct as such. I mean, it is kind of entertaining to think about it, that a killer has a code of conduct, but I imagine there would be some type of code of conduct or something like that. It's definitely an interesting way to think about it, but why not? Sorry, I'm enjoying my cup of tea there. French Earl Grey. So what actually is, the FBI actually suspect he may have killed teenagers, possibly even children. While he didn't admit to any murders during his time in the US Army, he did actually confess to raping a sex worker while he's on leave in Egypt and a college student while he was in Israel. So he also admitted to robbing banks in New York and Texas. The FBI did later confirm at least one of those robberies. The Community Bank branch in Tupper Lake in New York in April 2009. He also told authorities that he burglarized a home in Texas, and according to him, he set it on fire. So, according to FBI reports, though, he burglarized between 20 and 30 homes across the country and committed multiple bank robberies between 2001 and 2012. Now, it's believed that he would actually begin killing shortly after he had been discharged from the army in 2001. Authorities have been able to link him to as many as 11 murders, but unlike most serial killers, he didn't have a victim profile or victimology. He just chose targets at random. So again, guys, his victimology is random. So it was very hard to pinpoint if there was a serial killer. So on his so-called murder trips, he turned off his phone and he paid only in cash. For the murders of Bill and Lorraine Currier in Vermont, he would actually fly to Chicago, he would rent a car, and he would drive over 1,000 miles. Once there, he would actually retrieve what's called a murder kit he buried 2 years earlier. He was just waiting for the right moment. He would admit to 3 confirmed murders during interviews with FBI agents and Alaskan officials. We're now going to go through those 3 confirmed murders. So we're going to also go through the possible victims as well, guys. But he has been linked to 11 murders, but he's been confirmed for at least 3. It's a bit of a strange one because I have a feeling a man this disgusting, I have absolutely no doubt in my head that he has killed these 11 people. Also, the fact that he went around when he was driving on his murder trips and he would just bury these murder kits so that if he felt like it popped up in his head and he wanted to kill someone, it was there waiting for him. That boggles my mind. Boggles my mind. Sorry. Bill and Lorraine, they lived in a really modest lifestyle in Essex in Vermont. They were well-liked, routine-driven, and had no known enemies. So when they suddenly disappeared from their home in June, the community was really stunned because there were no signs of forced entry and there was no obvious motive and just silence. They had actually just celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Now, it would take over a year and the arrest of a man that was thousands of miles away, known as Israel Keys, for the truth service. Now, apparently he'd flown to Chicago, rented a car and driven 1,000 miles, like I said before. He was on a mission to kill and he wanted to do it far from home because he didn't want to be anywhere near his home. He'd buried a murder kit in the area around 2 years before that, complete with weapons, restraints, and tools. He would retrieve it, he would break into their home, and he would abduct them at gunpoint. It was here that he would take them to an abandoned farmhouse where he would brutally murder them. He would confess to the crime in some pretty chilling detail while he was arrested in Alaska. He'd had no known connection to them. He chose them at random. That was just his method. There was no pattern, there was no profile, there was no trace. Now, he said he avoided any type of detection by turning off his phone and paying in cash, and he would plan that meticulously. So he was always waiting. It was almost like he was waiting always for that moment if he wanted to strike. He had all these little murder kits all around, so he was always able to give into this urge as such. So unfortunately for their family, their bodies have never been found, but their story and the horror of what's happened to them helped investigators understand the scope of his crimes. It would be this next victim that would actually lead to his arrest. So in February in 2012, an 18-year-old girl by the name of Samantha Koenig, she was working a late shift at a coffee kiosk in Anchorage, Alaska. It was a really typical night. It's cold, it's quiet, and it's really uneventful until he showed up. Now, surveillance footage would later reveal the really quite chilling moment where she would be abducted at gunpoint. He'd force her from the kiosk and into his vehicle, and it would just set off a horrible chain of events. Now, I'm not sure if you guys can see it in the background if you're watching the video, but you can actually see how small this kiosk is. So it wouldn't have been relatively hard for her to be kidnapped. He would end up taking Samantha's debit card and other belongings. He sexually assaulted her, and he would end up killing her the next day after he kidnapped her. But sort of what followed was probably just a little bit more disturbing. He left her body in a shed behind his home and boarded a pre-booked cruise with his family in the Gulf of Mexico. So for 2 weeks, he would be on holiday or vacation while Samantha's family and community would be searching high and low for her. It was upon his return to Alaska, though, that he would stage a really, really cruel thing. He applied makeup to her face, sewed her eyes open with a fishing line, and posed her with a recent newspaper to make it look like she was actually alive. He then would demand ransom money, which was actually partially paid into her account. Unfortunately, though, she was already gone. So he's lying through his teeth. He'd actually dismembered her body and disposed of her remains in the Matatusca Lake. So it was the FBI's underwater search and evidence response team that had recovered her remains, which, let's be clear, that at least brings something for the family that they can bury her. Now, we're going to go through the list of possible victims. So our first potential victim is Julie Harris. She's a 12-year-old Special Olympics medalist in skiing. She disappeared in March 1996. She was waiting for a ride in a local church in Colville, Washington. Her remains would be found over a year later. She was a double amputee, and her prosthetic feet were discovered in the river a month after her disappearance. Keyes at that stage was only 18 years old, and he did live in the area and was questioned, but he never confirmed or denied his involvement. He would admit to killing 5 people in Washington state. He claimed to have buried or submerged a victim in Neah Bay between July and October in 2001. A body was found, but the death was actually ruled an accident. He also confessed to a double homicide of a young couple between 2001 and 2005, and 2 more victims between 2005 and 2006. One he had actually allegedly dumped in Lake Crescent. In 2012, a woman known as Lewis County Jane Doe, she was found in Morton, Washington. She was formally identified in 2022, though her name has yet to be released. Authorities do suspect that she might have been one of his victims. Now, Keyes also confessed to a murder up in New York State. The victim's identity, though, age and sex remain unknown, but the confession did seem like it was potentially credible. He's also a suspect in the 2007 Boca killing cases in Florida. These include the murder and abduction of Randy Gorenberg, the kidnapping of a woman and her toddler, and the execution-style killings of Nancy and her daughter Joey. The attacker's descriptions match him. So authorities do also believe that he may have murdered Deborah Feldman. She vanished in 2009 from New Jersey. Her body has never been found, but Keyes had searched her case online and reacted noticeably when he was shown her photo in particular. And finally, we have that he is suspected of the disappearance of James Jimmy Tidwell Jr., an electrician that was last seen in 2012 in Texas. A day later, a bank robbery occurred nearby, and the suspect wore a hard hat and a wig resembling Tidwell's hair. He later admitted that the wig was made of real human hair. Now, these are just some of the possible victims of Israel Keyes. His ability, though, to evade detection and his really cryptic confessions, it leaves a lot unanswered at this stage. So investigations do continue, and we may eventually learn the full extent of his crimes. So we're never really going to know at this stage until these investigations just continue on. His downfall would begin, though, when he used Samantha Koenig's debit card to withdraw money from several states. Now, the FBI would track these transactions, and they'd eventually arrest him in Lufkin, Texas on March 13th in 2012. On this very morning, he was arrested by Highway Patrol Corporal Brian Henry and Texas Ranger Stephen Rayburn in the parking lot. Now, investigators had circulated a lookout bulletin for the suspect's car, which had been used at an ATM to withdraw money from her account. Now, he came to their attention when law enforcement officers were monitoring hotel parking lots of out-of-state rental cars matching the police bulletin. So he sort of had flown underneath the radar for quite some time. And now he's doing something just a little bit stupid because he's taking money from her account. So the officers would end up stopping him after he drove slightly over the speed limit and searched his vehicle after they noticed cash stained with bright ink, indicating a die pack from a bank robbery. And her ATM card and cell phone were also discovered in his car upon a search. So he ends up being extradited to Alaska, where he would initially claim that her ATM card and phone came into his possession after someone had tossed the items into his open car window. Good story, mate. So he was charged with fraud related to the use of her bank accounts, and he eventually would confess to her murder. He would be represented by a Rich Kurtner, a federal public defender for Alaska, and he was indicted, and his trial was actually scheduled to begin in 2013. It's while he's incarcerated, though, that he's speaking to state and federal investigators several times over a period of months. At first, he really did cooperate to a certain extent. He would confess to some of his crimes and stating he wished to be executed within a year. He said he wanted to avoid publicity due to the negative attention to his daughter, his quite young daughter and family might face. But he would actually largely stop cooperating after his identity was discussed in the media. On Wednesday, May 23rd, 2012, he attempted to escape during a routine hearing. He would use wood shavings from a pencil to pick at his handcuffs. They had to use a taser, the US Marshals, to subdue him. It would be Maureen Callahan reports that part of his FBI file was not released due to claimed national security concerns. I apologise, they are just being a little bit naughty at the moment. So Callahan actually notes his military experience and documented interest in explosives speculates that he may have been known or suspected ties to violent extremist groups. The FBI did find him a particularly dangerous predator. Now, it's on December 2nd in 2012 that he took his own life in a jail cell in Anchorage, Alaska. He left behind a suicide note filled with disturbing and cryptic messages, but he really didn't provide any closure to any of his families of those victims. His death certainly marked the end of a terrifying chapter, but also questions remain pretty unanswered. So the case of Israel Keyes serves as a grim reminder of the existence of evil in our world and his ability to evade capture for so long, and the sheer brutality of his crimes continue to haunt those who actually have to study his case. Now, thank you for joining me today on this episode from Crimes from the Peanut Gallery. If you find this story as chilling as I did, please subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment if you'd like. Stay tuned for our next episode where we delve into another dark and twisted tale of serial killers. Until then, stay safe and be vigilant. Have a great weekend, my fellow peanuts. Bye.